Welcome to Life by Design, episode 382. Welcome to Life by Design. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Horatio Jug.
Happy to be here, as always.
Yeah, we are creators of Life by Design with many locations worldwide. Each week on the show, we discuss the principles and the practice of Life by Design. Today's episode, we're talking about hope and why we need to have hope and the value of having hope and not giving up hope and what that means in a more tangible way. I know it's something, Horatio, that is pretty easy to throw out. There's lots of cliche statements about, keep up the hope. But there's some real world examples of this. There's some great books, whether it be A Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, and just, we were talking in the pre-show about how, you were watching Shawshank Redemption. Maybe start off with that and we can jump into a conversation from there.
Yeah. So, I got this idea. It just seemed like it's interesting. Mike posted in the chiropractic productivity group, he posted something about this, there's an excuse now to be online all the time, right? There's I got to get my updates with what's happening. And then, as soon as you enter that line of thinking, as much as there's good content and stuff, and I'm posting online and we're doing this online, so there's lots of value. I'm not saying that it's not valuable. Mm-hmm. You get sucked into these vortexes, of despair, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and as we've discussed many times in the past, that when there's a high level of uncertainty, that increases, your anxiety, and that gets the whole thing going. And then there's that scene in the Shawshank Redemption, probably, I would say easily one of the greatest movies of all time.
Oh, easily.
And for people who haven't seen it, Andy Dufresne, who's the hero of the story, wants to build a library in the jail. So he keeps writing, the government has sent him books, and the shipment finally arrives. It takes like 10 years, and they send some records. And one of the records is from Figaro, that opera, and that Mozart wrote the music for. So Andy, shuts the door, locks the guards out, and plays one of the sonatas for all the prisoners to see. It's this really beautiful scene, right? Everyone stops and they're looking at it. And, they're prisoners. Mm-hmm. They have no idea what's going on, but just the beauty, something that they've never heard, takes them over. Of course, Andy gets sent to the I'm doing the air quotes, the hole. And then when he gets out, the boy, his buddies in jail are ripping on him. And he's like, that was the easiest time I ever did, because I had Mozart, to keep me company. And which sparks this whole conversation around there's a part of him that he protected, that he doesn't want anybody to get, and for him, and the film uses hope as that part, but I think it's greater than just hope. I think there's part of you that makes you human, and whether that's your soul or your consciousness, hope's a part of that, but I don't think the idea or the concept was fully developed in Shawshank Redemption. But the best way I can explain it is there's a part of you, that makes you uniquely you and makes you a human being. And, when in times like this, you can see people who have lost that part of themselves. You can see how they're acting. And I think it's important that we talk about realistic strategies for developing that part of yourself and maintaining that part of yourself, especially through really challenging times in your life. Because, forget this crisis. The reality is many of us have already been through multiple crises in our life. This one's just more relatable because it's kind of all happening at one time to everybody. But I hate to break the news to everyone. There's going to be more things that come up, that are really going to threaten your humanity. So I think it's important that it's always something that we're working on and developing.
Yeah, I think that this is where the value in history is. I think we talked about this in one of the pre-shows, maybe on a different topic, but for me, my minor in university was history, and I always was attracted to history. I really enjoyed it. And, the concept that history repeats itself has been true throughout the story of time in that sense. And, to think that we're going to get through this and then life is going to go on and, you'll have your other challenges and there won't be any major world challenges. You just look back year after year after year. You could go through every year throughout the history of time and find very significant major challenges. As you said, it's in many ways leveled the playing field for people. So I think that there's definitely a different awareness, this perfect storm of many people being affected, especially in the West, which I think it's a big difference maker because one, we are here in the West, so it's relatable to us. But I think anytime something affects the United States, especially, it tends to be more, worldwide, just because the United States really is the center of attention in the world. And you're right. We're gonna have these situations before, and we've had them before, and we're gonna have them again. You look at the book "A Man's Search for Meaning." It's really about Frankel's experience as a POW, and as we've talked about, just how no matter how horrific the experiences were for him, he found a way to maintain that part of him, and now nobody's saying that this is to that degree for at least for most people. I don't think, but. Yeah. Again, it's all contextual to you and what you're going through. And I say that I'm sure that for some people, this is, maybe to the same level. And I've had some conversations with people who I know that they're struggling, and, week by week, they're going to struggle more and more and more. And I guess the challenge is going to be, and I'll put it back to you, Cratio, for some direction here. It's almost like, when you say to a mom about having a home birth, that's a great conversation to have 5 years before they decide to have a baby. But, at 8 months, very difficult for them to even make a consideration that could be something to do. And so let's say somebody's struggling now and they've never done work to, build themselves up, protect themselves. What now? How do you get out of this, or how do you survive this crisis and then use that as a springboard to go forward from there?
Yeah. So, I don't know, seriously, like
it's a tough situation, right?
I'm trying to empathize, and I know I know the scholastic answers, right? This is like, hey, how do I do 100 push-ups, right? So it's easier to talk about doing 100 push-ups versus like actually getting on the ground and banging out 100 push-ups. Mm-hmm. But fundamentally, it's got to, this is something that I learned from Ayn Rand. Your only choice as a human being, and it's a fundamental choice, is either you're going to think or you're not going to think.
Right.
So either you're going to come to the conclusion that you're going to actively use your mind or not. That's right. Right. And once you've made that choice, then you can use, then you can start with the steps that most people know. So I think in this case, it comes down to a choice, and it's very clear in Viktor Frankl's book, because I think that's really what it's about is he, once the shock cleared, and once he came to the realization that his life was over, right, and that he would probably die of starvation or something horrible in this place, he, he made the decision that they were not going to take his humanity from him, that he was going to be a human being, right? And that was his only fundamental choice when everything else was taken away. Yeah. Right. You can't say, I don't feel like working today. You can't say, I don't want to do what you're going to tell me to do. You can't say, I'm not going to go in the gas chamber. You can't say no or yes to anything. You're programmed. You belong to somebody else. Right. The only choice was, I'm going to be a human being or I'm not going to be a human being. Right. And then the interesting stuff started to happen after that. He would sing to the guard, the prisoners at the end of the night. He would tell them stories. He was the one that ended up keeping hope alive for a lot of people. But I think the first thing you have to do is you have to make that choice. Right. Right. And it's one of those, it has to be a complete choice, but it's definitely one of those ones that you're going to have to remind yourself that you're making this choice, because it's going to be very easy to switch over to the other side. Right.
Well, and I think just from a purely strategic standpoint, probably the number one thing people can do right now is stop watching the news.
Oh, we'll get to that. But again, I think you have to make
you've made the choice. Yes. So now that that's made, you've decided, okay, now I've got to figure out a way to start protecting myself. This is new to me. I think what really needs to happen is you've got to cut off ties to there's really nothing you need to know. right?
Well,
Like, let's be honest. There's nothing you need to know that you don't already know at this point. You're being told to stay home or to, there's certain rules in place, and unless you're going to go out and protest that, and that's your choice. At this point, you're simply just going to follow those rules, and now your choice is, what am I going to fill my day with? Right? What am I going to fill my time with? There's nothing on the news that you need to know about. If there's something important, you're probably going to find out in some way, shape, or form. Access to media is completely, pervasive now. It's everywhere. We're fully integrated. Same thing with social media, unless you're staying in touch with people, trying not to end up down that rabbit hole, as you talked about earlier. And then, once that's done, then I would say going to your own thought process of, okay, what are my values? What are the things that now and when this is done, what are the things I want to accomplish in my life? What things do I love? And then try and spend some more time doing those things right now. And, at some point this is going to end and you can take that further. But for now, I think that really is a simple formula that people can use once they've made the decision, as you said.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've pretty much summed up the steps, right? So number one, you've made the choice. And the next thing is to become conscious that this is really happening, right? Like, look at what you're doing, what you're not doing. You need to realize that you're spending far too much time focused on negative stuff that's taking this away from you, right? And then you have to accept the fact that you're doing that, or at least accept the fact that you're not willing to accept the fact that you're doing that, right?
Right.
Going back to Nathaniel Brand. And honestly, I would start with spending long walks, just moving my body and letting my brain roam free. Mm-hmm. Right? I would start there. There's a lot of great thinkers in history, Friedrich Nietzsche, Thoreau, Emerson, Marcus Aurelius. They used to walk not like 20, 30 minutes. They used to go on like 4 or 5 hours. I'm not recommending you start with 4 or 5 hours.
Sure.
But I'm recommending you open the door, you change your environment, you start moving your body, right? Get some juices flowing to your brain and start actually thinking about what it is that you want to get out of this experience, and when you take control of your life, where you want it to go.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great, simple strategy for our listeners is, get back to making a decision. And again, if you're listening to this podcast, there's probably a relatively good chance that's the decision you have already made. Or if you're new to this podcast, step one is making the decision. I'll also put into, I think this is something I thought about with some of our other clients, Cratio. Great time to do the 30-day Think by Design challenge.
Yep.
Right. So, I'll put that in the show notes, guys, and you can check that out. It's a free quote unquote challenge. It's really 30 days of videos from Cratio talking about a lot of these concepts and asking questions more so to give you some things to think about when you're out on your walk. Protect your mind is really, I think, what it comes down to at this point is, making sure that once you're aware, once you've made a decision, that you're protecting, what material ends up in your brain, and then starting to focus it on the things that are going to make you happier and things that are going to be more aligned with your values. So go to the show notes, lifebydesign.com/podcast, find today's episode, and you'll see it in there. As always, thank you for joining the drive to 1 million families worldwide living life by design.